Welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday edition of the SumerSports show. I am without my co-host Parker Fleming today, as he is off doing some pretty big stuff, getting you guys ready for the season. Everyone who's using the SumerSports website, SumerSports.com, or looking at the Twitter account at SumerSports, or just interacting with us in general through the other mediums as well. But without Parker today, we have a really cool guest. Brett Mele, who is a data scientist at SumerSports on the business side. And Brett is coming to us from Philadelphia. He's really excited to talk to us today. And I'm really excited to have him. Brett, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Tej.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I think this should be a lot of fun, and just some background info for everyone out there before we get into some of our topics. We're gonna be talking about your background and then get into some of your favorite team talk, which you are a New York Jets fan, and then we'll even do some top 10 quarterback rankings, but with a little twist to it that has an analytics flair. So we'll get to that at the end there. But just for everyone out there, Brett went to Hamilton College, was an econ major, and then did his data science master's at Northwestern University. And then after that, I mean, there's really a long list of baseball related things. Was an intern for the Pittsburgh Pirates, an analyst for the Texas Rangers for 4 years, and now is joining us here at Sumer. Brett, did I leave anything out from that background of yours?
No, I think you just about covered it. Part of the reason I worked in baseball was I played baseball kind of growing up and in college as well. So I guess that's the other piece there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something really important to mention is like playing a sport at a high level gives you a different perspective. I think when you can talk about this stuff, it's not to say that people who didn't do that can't talk about sports analytics or sports as a whole, but I think like when you have that type of background playing baseball in college, I think that's really cool. So let's go back to the beginning. I love hearing about this. When you were growing up or when you were kind of going through school and everything, when was the moment you fell in love with sports in general? And then when was the moment where you got really into sports analytics?
Yeah, growing up, like I was into sports from a really young age. Started playing baseball, when I was 5 years old. Loved the sport. Started playing competitively, soon after that. And yeah, I think that's like where a lot of my love came, was just from playing. And I mean, other sports, I was always a fan as well. I was born into a Jets family, so been a football fan as long as I can remember. And yeah, just an overall sports fan. And Yeah, like playing was obviously a huge part of like my sports background. That was really like my main focus, growing up. So, where I'm from New Jersey, where I grew up, there's like a kind of like a hotbed of kind of baseball stuff around. So a lot of opportunities to, train and try and get better and work towards, playing at a higher level. So, I did that. And since it was such a big part of my life when I started, um, you know, getting older, getting to high school and things like that, it was always like kind of in the back of my mind, like thinking about, oh, like having not necessarily playing baseball, but having a career in baseball would be interesting. So that kind of always stuck there. And then, as far as like sports analytics, I think I was always pretty analytically inclined, always into, baseball cards, like reading the back, looking at stats and things like that. Always, played fantasy sports for, as long as I can remember, baseball, football, basketball. So that was always like something that I did, something that like I enjoyed thinking about. And then, in high school, started to, uh, find, books and things like that. I think it really started with not even like sports analytics books, but, I remember reading, Freakonomics, back in high school. And that was, a book about just kind of thinking about things a little bit differently and, kind of digging into numbers and kind of analyzing, uh, you know, either the economy or like different things, along those lines, just looking at them differently and kind of taking a different stance than kind of the traditional viewpoint. So that kind of like piqued my interest in some of those things that I think are kind of related to a lot of things that have happened in sports analytics. And then obviously Moneyball kind of came out, and I read that book, and that was a huge kind of difference maker for me, like seeing all the things that were going on in baseball and the sport that I like really loved growing up, and just kind of learning what was going on there. So I think that's kind of when it started, the interest in like sports analytics. And then when I got to college, Hamilton College, that's a school where we're in a conference where there's a lot of kind of front office, or a lot of alumni from similar schools that are in front offices around baseball. So then it started to kind of seem like more of a real opportunity, if that's something I wanted to pursue. And yeah, I ended up basically doing that and trying to keep that door open throughout my college career, and then ended up breaking in kind of after that.
I think it's really cool how Freakonomics kind of led into Moneyball for you, and kind of seeing that process happen where you talked about looking at things differently just from a overall world economy perspective, and then looking at things differently in sports analytics as a whole, just from Moneyball, which I know is so crucial to so many people's just having a career in sports analytics, and just it being involved in everything that we look at, but also just like the way that people think about things inside of sports and outside of it. So I think that's awesome. And like Moneyball coming out as many years ago as it did has really put baseball ahead of all the other sports, the major sports that we watch here in America. And like baseball analytics is much further along than football analytics, which we talk about often on the show. But I think football is working its way up. So like, what are some of the things that you think that football analytics can learn from baseball analytics, whether it's the trials and tribulations that maybe baseball has right, or just some of the things that baseball has always gotten right that football can also pick up?
Yeah, it's kind of a loaded question. I think like, baseball's dealt with a lot of the problems that I think football analysts are trying to solve already. Part of that is data availability. Baseball data has been, pretty well kind of curated and collected for a really long time. So that's definitely part of it. And then the other part of it is, just it's a lot more straightforward for, just your typical like statistician to kind of look at and analyze. Whereas, football, there's so many interactions and things that you have to account for just to get at, what, trying to quantify what a player did on a snap or on a play, and things like that. So I think like, yeah, that's definitely like part of the reason. Obviously, I don't think that's, anything groundbreaking why football is a little bit behind. But as far as like what football analysts can learn from baseball, I mean, I think there's probably a lot, probably more than I can go through kind of off the top of my head. I think one thing baseball does really well is like player value attribution. So like thinking about, and like if you were to go back and look, at old research and things, you can kind of see how that progressed from the different kind of stages of data that we've had in baseball. So kind of starting with just the play-by-play, what happened, at each state in the game, going into, getting to more of a pitch level, and then understanding, what is the value that, each player, you can attribute to each player on every pitch. So I think like that process of going from like play level to like pitch level, and kind of the differences with how you kind of attribute value to players, I think is maybe something that football can learn as we start getting into more of the, tracking data, kind of more granular type of data sets that we have now. But yeah, there are a lot of similarities there. Like, football has EPA, baseball has run values, and a lot of the way you attribute value to players is through run value, and it's all about kind of stripping out the noise from that and seeing what you can attribute to a player, and what's kind of either the environment or just luck or variance. So yeah, I think that's one thing. I think like the other big thing, kind of maybe down the road, maybe not right now, but as baseball is kind of solved, or at least getting to the process of solving a lot of these, I don't want to say low hanging fruit, but kind of some of these really like foundational problems. Kind of the industry has moved a lot towards player development, data-driven player development and things like that. And I think that's somewhere that's relatively untouched in football. I think part of it is, there's less of a runway for that in the NFL because you draft a player and he's on your roster and expected to play a role. In baseball, we draft them and they, 2 to 3 years or more in the minor leagues before they start, contributing to the big league team. So that's like a difference. But I do think, there has been a revolution in like player development in baseball. And I think like there are like elements there that kind of when football gets there, I think will be kind of important to look at and think about.
For sure. I definitely see that. And you talk about some of the models that baseball and football have that are similar. And then some of the things that baseball has models for right now that football doesn't have. Do you see that there's a cultural difference between baseball? Oftentimes people are focusing on different things from their approach to the models, whether it's like more advanced models at the expense of interpretability from the coaches versus in football, it's sometimes the other way around, or do you see it as kind of the same thing in both sports?
I think it's more the same, more similar than different. Right. Ultimately, you're trying to do a lot of the same things. Whether we're trying to attribute value to a player, trying to like get at some latent skill that a player has, or something like that. The approaches are probably different because the data is different. But I think in many cases, like we're trying to do the same things. And as far as like explainability, I think that is something that, working for a team, like that is something that's very important. None of the decision makers wherever I've been, they're less apt to use like something that they perceive as a black box. They want to know, they want to be able to understand why a model is producing the output that it is. So I do think that's something that people in baseball are thinking about. I think it maybe is perceived that way to people on the outside in the public space because, there's a lot of things that were done in baseball, 10 years ago that are kind of taken for granted as like people understanding. Like nobody talks about like computing run values now for baseball, but that's something like really foundational that is very important. But it's kind of like taken for granted that, in an XWOBA, like you can't build an XWOBA model without, having run values and knowing what the value of each play outcome is. So that I think that's kind of like maybe why it could be perceived that way. But yeah, I think it's definitely more similar than different. And like even if you look at, I don't know if you were asking a question or going to ask this question, but the kind of like football tends to play more in like the over under expected models, and baseball is more kind of, you're getting like an expectation of what would have happened or what should have happened or on average would happen based on, what a player does. Again, I think that's more of a difference in the data that you have, where baseball, we have information on what individual players actually did. And so we're trying to strip out, kind of the luck and the environmental factors. So like, we can say, the ball was hit this hard, it was hit this direction with this angle and this spin, on average, this, is, X amount value, or like more valuable, basically. Mm-hmm. In football, you can't really do that. So you try to control for everything that you try to model the environment basically and say, this was the state, this is on average what would have happened in that state. And then kind of assume that whatever you're not accounting for is attributed to the player. And then just kind of say that that's your measure of whatever skill you're trying to measure. So I think that's like the main difference. And I think, there's nuances with both approaches, but to me, like you're still trying to get at the same things.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm glad that you talked about expected versus over expected, because in football, we're so used to talking about over-expected stats now. Rushing yards over-expected, completion percentage over-expected. And you touched about this, but like, yeah, you're contributing the whole residual, the whole difference between the prediction and what the actual outcome to the player, which you can chalk a lot of it up to environment and luck and various other factors. So I think that football might work towards some more expected metrics like you talked about with XWOBA eventually, which I think could be really interesting. And that's why, like, I think with the way that football is progressing, where some of these metrics are starting to be created as football gets closer to baseball. Do you see that NFL teams need to have as big of analytics departments as MLB teams do?
It's hard for me to say like what like how big of a department or how many people in the department that you need. I think like even like working for a team, that's always a question that we talk about. And obviously as an analyst, as someone part of that team, you always want more hands on deck than not, because there's just so much to do. Like especially now in baseball, you have analysts that are very, very specialized. So you may have an analyst who's working directly with the team, going on the road and things like that. You may have like a hitting analyst, a pitching analyst. You'll have one working on the draft. You may have one doing kind of league economics and like player acquisitions. And you'll have, you may have more like data scientists and some analysts who, the data scientists are building models and the analysts are doing reporting. So I think where football is at right now, I think football is at the stage where you have a lot of like generalists, at least I don't know because I haven't worked for a team, obviously. But I think you have a lot of like teams, they're smaller departments. You have generalists who are kind of like doing everything. And I think as kind of some of the like foundational models and metrics and things like that get built out, I think you'll see teams kind of start to specialize and realize the need for more people to do those more specialized things. So I think it'll start to grow. As far as what they need, I don't know.
I think it's really great that you mentioned that. John Terramina, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago, who used to be the director of analytics for the Falcons, talked about how when you work in analytics in the NFL right now, you have to wear so many different hats. You have to focus on the salary cap and the draft and free agency. But with baseball, like you talked about, you're more specializing on various things, which I think can lead to some different results. And that bandwidth doesn't have to be as wide when it comes to that, which I think is really interesting. But yeah, but before we get into some other topics here, talking about the Jets, talking about the top 10 quarterbacks of this season, I do have to talk about the Circa Sports contest this year. So these are the biggest pro football contests in Las Vegas. It's back again for the 5th year. It's Circa Million and Circa Survivor with 14 million guaranteed in prizes. So you enter in Vegas, you can play from anywhere. There's 2 ways to win and no rake. You can play the Circa Million Pro Football Contest with 6 million in total prizes and quarterly payouts with 100% payback. The top prize is $1 million guaranteed. And then you can also pick a winner each week with Circa Survivor. And this is their biggest Circa Survivor pool yet, $8 million guaranteed. Select one team each week with no point spread. It's the biggest money that they have for this. So, 14 million in guaranteed prizes between Circa Million, Circa Survivor. Make sure that you enter in Vegas, play from anywhere. Like I mentioned last week, Eric, Parker, and I, all frequent members of this show, will be in Vegas for week 0 of the college football season, right before the NFL season kicks off in 2 weeks. We personally can't play in either of these contests because of rules, but we'd love to see people there signing up and playing in these contests as well. So if you have any questions about it, feel free to message any of us, but looking forward to seeing how those contests go this year. So Brett, let's talk about, you mentioned earlier in the show that you grew up a pretty avid Jets fan, and that was part of the family growing up. So to talk about the Jets, we have to talk about Aaron Rodgers first and foremost. I think that I can understand why the Jets wanted to trade for Aaron Rodgers, why they gave up the draft capital to do so, because they've tried to draft quarterbacks over and over and over for almost seems like forever, and just like due to luck and just variance and all these other factors, it hasn't really worked out for them. So I can see why, even with his age and the contract that they had to take on, the draft capital that they had to give up, they traded for him, because you just want to know like what type of quarterback you're getting. And I think he has a certain floor that drafting a quarterback does not. So what are kind of your expectations for Aaron Rodgers this season?
Yeah, I think if you were to kind of survey kind of public opinion, I think a lot of Jets fans were over the moon when the trade happened. I think like I was more like measured. Like I do think it's going to be an obvious upgrade, and I think Rodgers is still we'll get to it later, but I think a top quarterback in the league. How high he still is going to be is, I think, obviously a question, especially considering what he did last year. But yeah, I mean, I didn't love kind of giving up kind of future capital and kind of kicking the can down the road on this issue that the Jets have had for so long. But I think it obviously makes them more competitive. It'll put them in position to fight for a playoff spot, and hopefully more than that. So yeah, and it's very similar to the past Green Bay Jets deal when they traded for Brett Favre. Definitely has kind of it's reminiscent of that in a lot of ways. So I don't think I think they'll be competitive these next few years. I think I don't think Rodgers is going to fall off the cliff completely, but I do think we're going to kind of be back in the same spot 2 to 3 years from now, kind of figuring out the quarterback position. So we'll see what happens. I do think like with a lot of the quarterbacks that haven't worked out, there's probably a bunch of reasons for that. I think one thing that's always been consistent is the supporting cast has never been very good. It's been a lot of like really poor drafting, a lot of bad contracts given out in free agency. Having to spend a lot of capital to move up for a quarterback, which then takes away from how you can add around them in future years. So I don't think any quarterback that we've drafted over the past few years has really been giving a fair shot for just in terms of their own development. But yeah, we'll see what happens. I'm definitely like optimistic. I'm looking forward to the season, but I think a lot more measured than other Jets fans.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think like when you talk about, I guess, like some of the situations that Sam Darnold or Zach Wilson got put in compared to what Aaron Rodgers is going to get this season, like it probably wasn't going to work with Darnold and Zach Wilson, but Rodgers is getting a better supporting cast than both of those quarterbacks, which I think can be really helpful for him. And he gets probably his favorite offensive coordinator in Nathaniel and liking to work with, to coach him, and then Garrett Wilson, obviously, as his top receiver, who's one of the better Jets receivers that we've seen in a while here. So I think with all of that stuff kind of coming together for him, it should turn out pretty well. So where do you see and we just talked about like this roster, like how do you kind of assess the job that Joe Douglas has done as GM? Because the roster is very clear, top 5 defense in terms of talent and production last year and going into this year. And then the supporting cast that we just mentioned, but he's also been given a lot of resources. So how do you kind of grade what he's done with this roster?
Yeah, well, I think everything, when you talk about Joe Douglas, I think like the context that he was coming into, like you need to kind of take that into account too. So like everyone says, this is his like fourth season with the Jets, or fourth off season was this past season. Really, he was brought on after the entire 2019 off season. Like he didn't run that draft. So really it's his third one.
Yeah.
And when you look at like everything that happened before him, I was just kind of going through before the show and just kind of looking at their drafts back to like 2014. They took 4 offensive linemen in total in 5 years. Only one of the highest they took one was in the 3rd round. The highest they took a wide receiver was Devin Smith in the 2nd round. They didn't take any more higher than the 3rd round other than that. The highest corner that they took one in the 3rd round in that time, and they didn't take any pass rushers. So they're basically, they can focus aside from quarterback. They basically drafted in like lower value positions for that entire time. Signed overpriced free agents. So like the roster coming in was in a terrible spot. So I think Joe Douglas has done a pretty good job of pulling them out of it. I think their player valuation, I think, has been like on point the last few years. Couple rookie of the years last year. Even like a lot of the kind of more role players from the past couple of drafts have been like panned out really well. So I think he's done a lot of good things. I think there are specific decisions that as an analyst I would probably do differently, but I don't think you can argue with the results so far. So we'll see what happens like going forward. But I think he's been at least competent, which is more than you can say for most of the Jets history. So
that's a great point about the positional value that the previous Jets GMs took compared to Joe Douglas. And like, you can really already see the dividends where you draft the offensive rookie of the year and the defensive rookie of the year in Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner. And they're playing positions that affect the passing game, which we know usually are higher value positions. And that leads to really good results on both sides of the ball. And like, you think about some of the better draft classes we've seen in the past decade, like the 2017 Saints one, where they headlined by Marshawn Lattimore and Alvin Kamara come to mind. I think this Jets class can be similar in that regard. Yeah. So with Aaron Rodgers kind of, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And I was going to say like, and the Bennett, like, using your high value picks on high value positions, then you don't have to like fish for those positions in free agency. Like, it's really hard when you're trying to like buy those positions that are gonna matter a lot in your roster in free agency, and trying to pay market value for guys who probably aren't worth it. So
yeah, for sure. And like, even like, I mean, someone like Breece Hall, where like it's not necessarily a high value position, but like based on what he was doing last year, and we'll have to see how he comes back from his injury this year. But like, if he's able to get back to 90% of that, like, he's a really, really good running back, and you can see the explosiveness already. So like, I think you have a really good point about like their player evaluation seems to be doing something right. And we know that they have an analytics department that does some of this stuff. And one of their members is leaving to get a promotion in New Orleans. So you can tell that they're doing the right things when other organizations are starting to poach people from the Jets. So I think that's really nice to see. So so I thought that this would be fun to do. So I was listening to our former guest on this show, Brad Spielberger at PFF, and he was on this podcast called Caps Off, and he ranked the top 10 quarterbacks in the league right now. And it was a really cool segment, and to listen along and hear the reactions of the other members on the podcast. So I was thinking with you, since we were talking about Aaron Rodgers, we can do the top 10 quarterbacks for this upcoming season, but we can put a little twist on it. It is an analytics podcast. So I was thinking about it in terms of total EPA. And so we're going to be predicting what the top 10 will look like in total expected points added by the end of the season. And I think this can be fun, right? Because there's signal and volume, right? Like, better quarterbacks get used more than worse quarterbacks. You kind of have to think about how much these quarterbacks are going to be used in general. And then you also have to consider injuries, because it's total EPA. So someone like Tua might get put lower in the rankings than if we were doing like an EPA per play rankings. And then all the other considerations, changing teams and everything we have to do for that. So Brett, before we get into your list, we'll go 1 through 10 on the way down. And I have a list as well. And you can just go, we'll go on each one, and we'll talk about each quarterback, and I'll say where my quarterback fit in. This was the top 10 from last year, just to give the listeners a base. So number 1 was Patrick Mahomes by a wide margin. Number 2, Josh Allen. 3, Jalen Hurts. 4, Joe Burrow. 5, Jared Goff. 6, Tua. 7, Trevor Lawrence. 8, Jimmy Garoppolo, even though despite not playing the full season. 9, Daniel Jones. 10, Dak Prescott. 11, Tom Brady. 12, Geno Smith. 13, Lamar Jackson. So you can see that some of these were impacted by injuries, like Jimmy Garoppolo, Lamar Jackson. Some of the there were some surprises last year, like like Jared Goff and Tua ending up in the top 10. So I think that's like everything that we have to consider for this. So why don't you kick us off with the quarterback that you have at number one? I think I know who it is, but I'm curious to see what you have.
Yeah, I think the top three are like going to be pretty straightforward. So Mahomes number one. I don't think there's too much to say there.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at stats for this, and since 2011, Mahomes has the fourth most total EPA in the league behind Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, and Drew Brees, and he's only been a full-time starter since 2018. So I think it's very easy to put Mahomes there.
Yeah. So yeah, then number two, again, chalky, going with Josh Allen. Yeah, and again, like passing and rushing value. There's no one that does it kind of as good as he does. So
I'm with you there as well. We talked about this last week with Amelia Probst, where they might lower Josh Allen's rushing usage a little bit this season, but I think just in general, we forget how good Josh Allen was playing last year, literally at an MVP level before his elbow injury, and still played okay with the injury, but it did taper off a little bit. So I like buying the regression there. And he's like a YOLO type quarterback that's going to yield himself to a wide range of outcomes. And I can also buy his interception luck not being as bad this year. So there's everything to like about Josh Allen from a tools perspective, from just like what he can do from a rushing perspective, and that connection he has with Stephon Diggs.
Yeah. So yeah, and then number three, I also don't think is too much of a surprise. I'm going with Joe Burrow.
Okay, so I actually didn't have Joe Burrow at number three. Okay. I thought I had Jalen Hurts at three. I think that because he finished third last year, I'm kind of going on last year's list, and like the quarterback sneak and everything that they do with him to just get him extra value, I think is just so powerful. I think Joe Burrow from a passing perspective, obviously will probably have more EPA, but like Jalen Hurts is rushing, his scrambling and the sneaks, I think will add up enough to put him at third.
Yeah. My list, I am heavily influenced by regression to the mean. So that's kind of a big part of how I rank these, and then also trying to account for kind of the development curves of some of these guys. So, so I don't have Hurts at 4. I'm going with Justin Herbert at 4.
Okay, I like buying the positive regression again for him. Yeah. What do you kind of see as his outlook this season with new offensive coordinator, just signed his extension, Quentin Johnston being added there?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I feel like when QBs get into a new system, like sometimes there's a little bit of an adjustment, but I mean, Herbert, all the like the peripherals there are just so good. It doesn't really take sacks, avoids interceptions and turnovers, and obviously can do it all with his arm. So and he was 24 years old last year, going to be 25. So just buying kind of the bounce back year for Herbert.
I definitely see that. I think based on what we saw the first 2 seasons from Herbert coming in his rookie year and being the best quarterback of that draft class just that season, and then building on that his second year, where we really saw him take his game to the next level with new coaching in there. And then we saw it get a little bit stale with Joe Lombardi last year, which led to not as high of a production as you would have expected from him. But I like Kellen Moore, I think, is a really, really good offensive coordinator. Those Dallas offenses, even with Cooper Rush, were able to put up some points in games, but obviously he was top 5 in offensive production with Dak Prescott starting there. And then the Chargers offense was really missing a yards after catch type player. Keenan Allen is a route runner, is an expert route runner and can win there. And Mike Williams wins on a lot of contested catches, but adding Quentin Johnston in there, we saw all of last season at TCU, what he can do with the ball in his hands. Once he gets the ball in his hands, I think can be really exciting. And I think Kellen Moore will have a lot of fun scheming up different ways to get him the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree with all of that. So yeah, now number 5 is where I have Hurts. I mean, really just, this is just me assuming some regression to the mean. Teams, probably like maybe, being able to figure out the Philadelphia offense a little bit better. Might not, that offensive line I feel like is a little older, so maybe some regression there. So yeah, just predicting a little bit of a kind of return to earth from the Eagles offense.
I could see that. Like you mentioned with the offensive line, it stayed relatively healthy and is a year older this year. I think the thing for me with Jalen Hurts is you throw Rashad Penny in there, you throw DeAndre Swift in there, you still have Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott and Trey Sermon. So like you have more ways to attack the run game this year. And we know that linebackers already find it so difficult to figure out what's happening in the run game with a mobile quarterback and okay running backs. But now you throw in these explosive running backs that have all dealt with some sort of injuries. But if they're on the field with Jalen Hurts, I just think the rushing ability that he's going to have this year can be high end. And then that's just another year of his connection with AJ Brown, I think. So that's why I really like having him in the top 5. I like what you had with him at 5, and I had him at 3 as well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously he's, I expect him to be, a great, like, productive player. So I think like these, like the 3 that I have here, I could have put them in any order, 4 to 6, but getting to 6. So I have Trevor Lawrence, just kind of buying the trajectory, I guess, here, kind of, going into his 3rd season, played really well, especially the second half of last year. So just kind of buying that continuing. Also, adds value like with his arm and can run a little bit. So,
yeah, I had Trevor Lawrence at 8, so a little bit lower on him, but nothing against Trevor Lawrence. I thought he was awesome last year, especially the second half of the season. And like the thing that was missing from the Jaguars offense, since it ran through Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram and Zay Jones, was like a deep ball element to it. You throw in Calvin Ridley, who specializes in that. I think that could get really fun. My one concern, and I wanted to ask you about this, is are you worried that Jacksonville's offensive line projected to be around bottom 5, bottom 10 in the NFL by Mike Clay's ratings or by Ben Baldwin's rankings? Are you worried about that holding him back a little bit?
I mean, it's definitely a concern. But we've seen, Joe Burrow dealt with that for the majority of his career and was still, productive. So we'll see. Like even though the offensive line is bad, like I think I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think he was pretty good at avoiding sacks. It's, does he, run the risk of like more injuries and things like that? Maybe, but not in the business of predicting injuries. So.
Yeah. And like that was the thing about Trevor Lawrence rookie year that I think still gave a lot of people hope, was he was really good at avoiding sacks despite not having good offensive line, not having a good coaching staff. So it's probably not as much of a concern for him as it would be for a less mobile quarterback or a quarterback who doesn't process as well. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. So next one, this is one I wasn't really sure where to put. I have Tua. I don't know, obviously he's got to stay healthy, but the offense last year was one of the best in the league, and obviously has the weapons, has the scheme, and I think you ran down the list. I think he was top 5 last year in total EPA. So, if he can stay on the field, I feel like he's going to be up there.
For sure. I think if you could guarantee 17 games of Tua for us, he would have to be top 5 in these rankings, just because Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle were first and second in adjusted yards per route run last year. Like they are the best, or not, if not second best receiving duo in the NFL. Mike McDaniel is great at scheming. And like the crazy thing is, like, Braxton Berrios, who's like a fine player, is Miami's wide receiver 3 right now. And like, it doesn't really matter, I think, because like the weapons are so good and that offense is schemed up so well. So I could definitely get behind Tua. I had him at 10th just because the concern is there for me of the health perspective. And there were some other quarterbacks I wanted to put ahead of him, but I really like having him as high as he did.
Gotcha. Then 8, I'm going to go with Dak. Obviously the change in Kellen Moore's not there anymore, but I think last year was such like an unlucky year for him, especially like on the turnover front. So just betting on him kind of rebounding back to what we've seen in the past. Still think he's a very good quarterback. Could potentially even be higher than this. by the end of the year.
Yeah, I had Dak at 8th also, actually, or I am at 7th, so one spot ahead. I'm really high on Dak and the Cowboys offense last year. You know, if you look at his career interception rate, 2019 was 1.8%, 2020 1.8%, 2021 1.7%. So he's hovered around that number for 3 years. Last year though was 3.8%. He was trying to be aggressive on third down, and sometimes it didn't work out, and there were some tip passes that led to other interceptions. And I think that probably put him lower on people's perceptions of him, but also on lists like total EPA. So I really like buying into Dak this year. You throw Brandon Cooks in there as well, give them that complementary receiving option, and then you're going to have tight end by committee. And I think all of those things together can be a pretty big year for Dak.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then so moving on to number 9, I have Lamar. You know, I was a little surprised looking at the numbers the past few years. Like, I mean, I know there's been injuries, there's been a lot of stuff there, so he hasn't really like fallen too high in like the total EPA rankings. But you know, I still think, you know, he has the rushing ability. Obviously, probably going to have like a little bit of an update to the offense now with new coordinator. So. You know, just kind of buying a little bit of a bounce back for Lamar there.
I love that. I have Lamar at 5th, so I think that's probably our biggest difference of any quarterback this year. I get that there's injury concern with Lamar as well, but like Todd Monken coming in there, you know, you draft Zay Flowers, you sign Odell Beckham, like they're really giving Lamar Jackson an opportunity to take advantage of this year. And I think like I still always go back to what Lamar Jackson was able to do in 2019 and take the league by storm and put up all those numbers and win MVP. And then you look at this year where they're going to be having a lot of 4 receiver sets out there. Mark Andrews is still a top 3, top 5 tight end in the NFL. And then that new offense where I think it can be schemed up really well. And we know Monken's specialty at Georgia was using tight ends. You think about the way he used Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington, and now you have Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, plus being pretty deep at receiver. So I can see a lot of paths for Lamar to do this. And he's still someone that total EPA doesn't capture his full value enough, because when he's handing the ball off, it's a lot easier for running backs than when other quarterbacks hand the ball off. But I believe that he can show up highly in total EPA as well.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on all those points. Before they just hired Adam Gase, I wanted them to. I was hoping they would hire Monken. I think they interviewed him, but they went a different direction, obviously. So yeah, excited to see what that offense looks like this year. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe I'm a little too low here, but and then so number 10 is where I have Rodgers. I think, you know, last year was definitely a down year, but you look at the 2 years before, he was, you know, top 3 in total EPA. So, you know, just kind of buying like a little bit of regression to that, but obviously you have to take into account, you know, he's almost 40 years old, if not 40. So he's probably not going to play the level that, you know, he has been in the past, the Hall of Fame level, but I still think he's a top 10 quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had Rodgers at 9, so pretty close. Cool to see that we had the same players in the top 10, just different order for some of them. And yeah, with Rodgers, I think you hit on a lot of those points where we've seen this bounce back before. We saw him not play well, not show up well in efficiency metrics in 2018, 2019. And then 2020, 2021, he wins MVPs, ranks top 3 in total EPA, like you mentioned. So we see a slight dip last year in his performance, not saying he will return to MVP level. And I think we both have that with him at 10 and 9, respectively, in our rankings. But I just think that in a new situation where it maybe got stale in Green Bay, but he'll be re-energized in New York, which is not like an analytical reason, but it's I think something that can affect these players. And like everything we talked about earlier with Garrett Wilson and the rest of the supporting cast can make for a pretty good year for Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, no, totally agree.
So who are some of the players that you considered for your top 10 that you ended up leaving out?
So I think the biggest one is like Deshaun Watson, like just not, you have no idea what's going to happen there. So, just really, like, he could rebound to, pre-Cleveland form, but what he showed last year was also, pretty abysmal. So we'll see what happens. Any of the San Francisco quarterbacks could probably jump in by the end of the year. I just don't know which one it's going to be. Especially like considering Jimmy G has been in the top 5 of these rankings for a few years, and I think if you're not in tune to kind of EPA and some of these like analytical metrics, you probably wouldn't think that. But just that offense produces quarterbacks who are efficient. So
yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, I had a similar thought process as you. Deshaun Watson was 11th for me. I think that we're not going to see him as bad as last year. That'd be pretty difficult for him to do. He played in some windy and some bad weather games last year and had to take over the offense midway through the season. But he was so special in 2020. And like, even though the Texans won 4 games that year, like I thought he had an argument for MVP because he was the only reason why that team was in games every week, because there wasn't that good of a supporting cast and the defense was really bad. And I think that with an offseason working with Kevin Stefanski and throwing in Elijah Moore there, another year of David Njoku continuing to ascend, and then obviously Amari Cooper being a steady receiver there as well. I could see a path for Deshaun Watson surprising some people and finishing in the top 10. And yeah, I had Brock Purdy 12th, and like I just think like, yeah, again, if you could guarantee that he was going to start full 17 games, he'd be really high on this list, similar to Tua. Like we were talking about earlier, but it's hard to know with San Francisco. But I think you nailed it when you touched on just Jimmy Garoppolo being top 5 in this basically every season.
Yeah. Well, we were kind of right in lockstep on the rankings, just a little bit different order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I like some other quarterbacks that I considered for the top 10, but like I had to leave off just out of space. Jared Goff was 13th for me. Daniel Jones, Geno Smith, Kirk Cousins, like these are quarterbacks I like could see finishing in the top 10 for sure. I wouldn't be surprised by any of them. But like there just wasn't space for them. And we had to make sure we got the truly elite quarterbacks, especially from a production standpoint before we got to those quarterbacks as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there a quarterback you could see being like a total surprise, like one that we didn't even mention in our honorable?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's like maybe Daniel Jones, maybe, but I mean that would just kind of be depending on like the scheme and the rushing production there. I feel like we hit on most of them. I mean, maybe one of the rookies has a big year, but that usually is not what happens for rookie quarterbacks. So, yeah, I think we covered all of them.
Yeah, I think so too. And yeah, I mean it's tough to pick one specifically, but like CJ Stroud, I think could have an outside shot. I'm not saying he's better than Bryce Young or Anthony Richardson, but like I just think Stroud's floor is higher entering the league, and then he gets to throw to Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz and a offensive line that is has been paid really well this offseason, and we know that is pretty good with like a new play caller there as well. So I could see that as opportunity. And then like Sam Howell, I feel like is like a true outside shot that like I want to see make it in top 10, because I think Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson are awesome. And I think having Eric Bieniemy there as well, like probably won't make it into the top 10 or top 12, but I think it'd be really cool if Sam Howell does and add to just like how tough the NFC East already is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, Brett, I mean, really appreciate you coming on. Glad we got to talk about so many different topics today, between applying baseball analytics to football, your Jets, and ranking these top 10 quarterbacks in total EPA this season. If there's anything you want to plug before we close up here, feel free to do so.
No, I don't think there's anything aside from SumerSports, but yeah, go check out the website. I don't have any articles up there, but there's been a few a few good ones the last few weeks. So if you haven't read those, go check those out.
Yeah, and I think like once if you end up doing an article as well, I think that would have to be something that everyone that's listening to this would read, because I'm sure it would be super cool. And yeah, I mean, this was a great conversation in general. Eric will be back on Friday doing his usual Friday solo show, and then Eric and Thomas on Monday after that, and then Parker will be back here next Wednesday. So we got some fun shows planned for the SumerSports show. If you're enjoying it, be sure to rate and review, and let us know what you think about the podcast. And then, yeah, like Brett mentioned, like check out SumerSports.com, have some cool articles going up there. Our Quinn, who's been on the show before, put together a really cool article on computer vision and how that can be used to talk about quarterback throwing motion. And like Justin Herbert's relevant in that article because Quinn was able to kind of identify that Herbert had the more optimal throwing motion before he had even played a game, just based on training camp footage. So as we get more training camp material here, and with the Jets on Hard Knocks and everything, we should get some pretty up close shots of Aaron Rodgers. Hopefully we can also have that type of stuff there as well. But yeah, appreciate everyone listening. Appreciate all the comments and everything we get on the show. And we will talk to everyone next time.